The week that could transform American agriculture. There are moments in policy when abstract legislative language translates into real money in real bank accounts, when years of negotiation culminate in deals that reshape entire industries, when farmers and ranchers who have been struggling through uncertainty suddenly see a path forward. According to Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, we are living through such a moment right now. In a statement that has generated significant attention throughout agricultural communities and beyond, the Republican senator declared that recent developments involving the 45Z tax credit and newly finalized trade agreements represent nothing less than the biggest week ever for American agriculture. This is not the kind of hyperbole that typically characterizes political statements. Marshall is known as a measured voice on agricultural policy, someone who understands the economics of farming from personal experience, and who has built credibility by focusing on substance over theatrics. When he makes a claim this sweeping, it demands serious examination of what exactly has changed and what it means for an agricultural sector that has faced years of volatility, uncertainty, and pressure. The 45Z tax credit is at the heart of this story, though its technical designation obscures its potentially transformative impact. This provision, part of broader energy and climate legislation, creates significant financial incentives for the production and use of sustainable aviation fuel and other clean transportation fuels derived from agricultural products. For corn growers, soybean farmers, and others in the biofuels industry, this represents a massive expansion of market opportunities. The credit provides up to $1.75 per gallon for qualifying fuels, a subsidy level that makes previously marginal or uneconomical production suddenly viable and profitable. The implications ripple through rural America. Ethanol plants that were struggling now have reason for optimism. Farmers who faced uncertain demand for their crops now see stable or expanding markets. Communities built around agricultural processing have new reasons to invest in infrastructure and workforce development. But the 45Z credit is not just about money flowing into the agricultural sector, though that is significant. It represents a fundamental shift in how American agriculture relates to climate and energy policy. For years, farmers have been caught between environmental regulations they often viewed as burdensome and a changing climate that increasingly disrupts traditional growing patterns with droughts, floods, and unpredictable weather. The biofuels incentive structure created by 45Z offers a different model. It positions agriculture not as a problem to be regulated, but as part of the solution to be incentivized. It creates economic value for sustainable practices, making environmental stewardship profitable rather than merely compliant. This alignment of economic and environmental interests has been the goal of many agricultural economists and policymakers for years, and 45Z represents the most significant implementation of that vision to date. The trade agreements that Senator Marshall referenced in his statement are equally consequential, though they operate on a different level. The Trump administration has finalized or is on the verge of finalizing deals with several key trading partners that address long-standing barriers to American agricultural exports. These include revised terms with Japan that increase access for beef and pork, agreements with the European Union that reduce tariffs on grain and dairy products, and understanding with several Southeast Asian nations that open markets for soybeans, corn, and other commodities. Each of these deals individually would be significant. Together, they represent a recalibration of global agricultural trade in ways that benefit American producers. The Japanese agreement is particularly important given that country's role as a major importer of high-quality beef. American ranchers have faced significant disadvantages compared to competitors from Australia and other nations that had more favorable trade terms with Japan. The new agreement levels the playing field, reducing tariffs that had made American beef less competitive and creating opportunities for increased exports that could amount to billions of dollars annually. For ranchers in Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, and other cattle-producing states, this is not abstract policy. It is the difference between profitability and struggle, between expanding operations and selling off herds, between passing farms to the next generation and walking away from a way of life. The European Union agreements address a different set of challenges. Europe has long maintained complex agricultural policies that protected domestic producers while creating barriers for American exports. Negotiations have been difficult, complicated by food safety standards, environmental regulations, and political sensitivities on both sides of the Atlantic. The deals now being finalized represent compromises that both sides can claim as victories, but that meaningfully expand American access to European markets. For grain farmers in the Midwest who have seen yields increase through improved seed varieties and farming practices, but who have struggled to find buyers for their expanded production, European market access is crucial for absorbing supply and maintaining price stability. The Southeast Asian agreements tap into some of the fastest growing economies in the world and some of the most rapidly expanding demand for agricultural products. As hundreds of millions of people in nations like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines see rising incomes, their diets are changing to include more protein and processed foods. This creates enormous demand for feed grains, for soybeans used in cooking oil and animal feed, and for the kinds of agricultural commodities that American farmers produce efficiently and in large quantities. Getting market access to these growing economies positions American agriculture to benefit from one of the most significant economic trends of the coming decades. But understanding why Senator Marshall would characterize this as the biggest week ever for American agriculture requires understanding the context from which these developments emerge. The agricultural sector has been through an extraordinarily difficult period over the past several years. The trade war with China that began in the first Trump administration devastated export markets, particularly for soybeans. Farmers who had built their operations around Chinese demand suddenly saw that market largely disappear, with prices plummeting and storage facilities overflowing with crops that could not be sold. While the government provided some financial assistance to offset losses, subsidies are not a substitute for functioning markets, and the damage to the agricultural economy was severe. The COVID pandemic compounded these challenges. Disruptions to processing facilities, transportation bottlenecks, and labor shortages created chaos in agricultural supply chains. Farmers dumped milk because processing plants could not handle it. Meat producers euthanized animals that could not be processed. Grain sat in silos because export terminals were operating at reduced capacity. The economic pain was substantial, and many farm operations that had been viable for generations faced the possibility of bankruptcy and foreclosure. Government support programs helped some, but could not reach everyone, and the psychological toll of wasted production and uncertain futures weighed heavily on farming communities. Climate change has added another layer of difficulty. Extreme weather events have become more frequent and more severe. Droughts in some regions, flooding in others, unpredictable frosts, and intense heat waves have all disrupted growing seasons and reduced yields. Farmers have always dealt with weather risk, but the scale and frequency of extreme events appears to be increasing, making traditional risk management strategies less effective. Crop insurance helps but does not eliminate losses, and the cumulative effect of multiple difficult years has eroded the financial cushion that many operations relied on to weather temporary setbacks. Input costs have risen dramatically. Fertilizer prices spiked to levels that made some crops uneconomical to plant. Fuel costs increased, raising the expense of running machinery and transporting products to market. Labor costs have gone up as agricultural work competes with other sectors for workers, particularly during peak seasons when harvest timing is critical. Equipment costs have soared as supply chain issues and increased demand drove up prices for tractors, combines, and other machinery essential to modern farming. The combination of reduced income from lost markets and increased costs for inputs created a profit squeeze that forced many farmers to make difficult decisions about whether to continue operating. Debt levels in the agricultural sector have been rising, creating vulnerability. When farmers face multiple years of losses or narrow margins, they often borrow to cover operating expenses, hoping that future years will be better and allow them to pay down debt. But if conditions do not improve, debt accumulates, interest payments consume more of whatever income exists, and the path back to financial stability becomes harder to see. Rural banks that traditionally supported agricultural lending have become more cautious, recognizing that too much exposure to a struggling sector could threaten their own viability. Access to credit, once reliable for farmers with good track records, has become more difficult and more expensive. The social and psychological dimensions of these challenges are significant, though less often discussed. Farming is not just an occupation, it is an identity and often a multi-generational tradition. When farmers face the possibility of losing land that has been in their families for generations, when they must tell children that there will be no farm to inherit, the emotional weight is enormous. Rural communities built around agriculture face decline as farms consolidate or disappear entirely, as young people leave for more stable opportunities elsewhere, and as the economic base that supported schools, businesses, and community institutions erodes. The sense of crisis in rural America is not merely economic, it is existential, a question of whether a way of life can survive in a rapidly changing world. Against this backdrop of challenge and uncertainty, the developments that Senator Marshall is celebrating represent a genuine shift in trajectory. The 45Z tax credit creates immediate economic opportunity. Farmers can begin planning production with confidence that there will be demand and that prices will reflect the value of their crops. Ethanol plants can invest in expansion and modernization, knowing that policy support for biofuels is substantial and durable. Rural communities can anticipate economic activity and employment stability that has been absent in recent years. The psychological impact of having clear policy support and expanding markets should not be underestimated. After years of feeling abandoned or forgotten, of watching markets disappear and policies fail to address their concerns, farmers are seeing concrete evidence that their sector is being prioritized and supported. The trade agreements similarly provide tangible benefits and psychological relief. Knowing that export markets are expanding rather than contracting, that years of negotiation have produced results, that other nations are opening their markets to American agricultural products creates confidence that supports investment in planning. A farmer deciding whether to plant a particular crop, whether to invest in new equipment, whether to expand livestock operations, needs to believe that there will be markets for increased production. The trade deals provide that belief, creating conditions for growth rather than mere survival. The political dynamics surrounding these developments are complex and reveal tensions within both parties. Senator Marshall, as a Republican representing a heavily agricultural state, has every incentive to promote achievements that benefit his constituents, and that can be attributed to a Republican administration. His characterization of these developments as historic serves both to highlight genuine policy wins and to build political capital for himself and his party. Democrats, meanwhile, face the challenge of responding to achievements that benefit constituencies they have historically struggled to reach. Many rural areas have shifted decisively toward Republicans in recent elections, and Democrats have found it difficult to articulate agricultural policies that resonate with farmers and ranchers. Acknowledging the significance of the 45Z credit and the trade deals means giving credit to political opponents, but ignoring or minimizing them risks further alienating agricultural communities. The environmental community is divided on the 45Z credit. Some advocates see it as an important step toward decarbonizing transportation, creating markets for sustainable fuels, and incentivizing agricultural practices that reduce emissions. But others worry that the credit primarily benefits large-scale industrial agriculture, that it could encourage expansion of monoculture corn and soybean production with negative environmental consequences, and that it represents a subsidy to an industry that should face stronger regulation rather than financial support. This debate reflects broader tensions within environmental policy about whether market-based incentives or regulatory mandates are more effective and appropriate for addressing climate change. The economic analysis of these policies is similarly contested. Supporters argue that the 45Z credit and expanded trade create genuine economic value, supporting jobs, stabilizing communities, and positioning American agriculture for long-term competitiveness. Critics contend that the credit is corporate welfare, that it distorts markets in ways that benefit a few large companies while doing little for the majority of farmers, and that trade deals often promise more than they deliver in terms of actual market access. The truth likely lies somewhere between these positions, with real benefits that are unevenly distributed and subject to implementation challenges that could limit their impact. What is clear is that American agriculture has reached an inflection point. The challenges of recent years have forced the sector to confront fundamental questions about sustainability, about market access, about the relationship between farming and environmental policy, and about the viability of rural communities. The developments that Senator Marshall celebrated this week do not resolve all of these questions, but they represent an attempt at answers. The 45Z credit says that agriculture can be part of climate solutions and should be rewarded for that role. The trade agreements say that opening markets, rather than protecting domestic producers, is the path to prosperity. Whether these answers prove correct, whether the policies deliver on their promises, whether farmers see sustained benefits rather than temporary relief, will become clear in the months and years ahead. For now, there is cautious optimism in many agricultural communities. Commodity prices have stabilized or increased in anticipation of expanded demand. Equipment dealers are reporting increased interest from farmers considering purchases. Rural banks are seeing loan applications from operations planning expansion. This economic activity, after years of contraction and uncertainty, is welcome and potentially self-reinforcing. If farmers believe conditions are improving, they invest and expand, which creates the demand and economic activity that justifies that belief. The psychological and economic cycle can work in positive directions as well as negative ones. The coming growing season will be a test of whether the optimism is justified. Will the 45Z credit translate into actual expanded production and utilization of biofuels? Will the trade agreements result in increased export volumes and better prices for American producers? Will farmers who make investment decisions based on these policies see returns that justify the risks? The answers will shape not just the economics of agriculture, but the politics of rural America and the viability of the policy approaches that Senator Marshall championed. If this truly proves to be the biggest week ever for American agriculture, it will be because these policies delivered sustained, widely distributed benefits that transform the sector's trajectory. If instead they prove to be oversold or poorly implemented, the disappointment will be profound and the political consequences significant. The stakes are high, the hopes are elevated, and the watching world of American agriculture is waiting to see if this moment lives up to its promise.